I was standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, coffee in hand, when a white sedan pulled up with Village of Lakewood Code Enforcement emblazoned on the side, and I knew my day was about to go completely sideways. The January air in suburban Chicago bit at my face as I watched a woman step out of her BMW across the street. Deborah Patterson, president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association, wore her usual power suit and an expression that suggested she had just discovered a dead raccoon in her rose garden. She stood there with her arms crossed, clearly waiting for the show to begin. I had moved to Meadowbrook Hills 3 years ago, thinking I had found the perfect neighborhood in Lakewood, Illinois. The houses were beautiful, the streets were clean, and the schools were excellent. What I hadn't counted on was Deborah and her tyrannical grip on every single aspect of neighborhood life. She treated the HOA bylaws like they were the 10 Commandments handed down from God himself. The code enforcement officer stepped out of the sedan, clipboard in hand. He was a younger guy, maybe late 20s, with a nervous energy that suggested he was relatively new to the job. Behind him, another vehicle pulled up. This one I recognized immediately. A Ford F-150 with a dent in the passenger door. My Uncle Frank's truck. Frank Richardson was my mother's brother, a man who had spent 30 years as a building inspector for Cook County before retiring and picking up occasional contract work with various municipalities. He was also the most honest, no-nonsense person I had ever known. The kind of guy who would fail his own mother's building if the electrical work wasn't up to code. "Ethan," Frank called out as he approached, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Then he noticed Deborah across the street, and his expression shifted. "What's going on here?" The younger officer, whose name tag read Martinez, consulted his clipboard. "We received a complaint about excessive snow accumulation on the property. HOA regulation violation." I stared at him. Snow accumulation. It snowed 6 inches last night. I was literally about to shovel my driveway. Deborah had crossed the street now, her heels clicking on the salted pavement. "The bylaws are very clear, Ethan. Section 12, subsection 4. All snow must be cleared from driveways and walkways within 12 hours of snowfall cessation. It has been 14 hours. Deborah, it stopped snowing at 5 in the morning. I checked the weather app when I woke up." Actually, she pulled out her phone with a flourish that would have made a magician jealous. According to the National Weather Service, the last flake fell at 4:47 a.m. Making it 14 hours and 13 minutes, Frank stepped forward, his hands in the pockets of his heavy jacket. "Deborah Patterson, I thought that was you." Something flickered across Deborah's face. Recognition, followed quickly by what looked like concern. "Frank Richardson. I heard you were doing inspection work in the area. You two know each other?" I asked. Frank's expression was unreadable. "We've crossed paths." "Deborah, this is my nephew. You're really calling code enforcement over 2 hours of unshoveled snow?" "The rules exist for a reason," Deborah said, her voice tight. "Property values, safety, community standards. If we let one person slide, everyone will think they can ignore the bylaws." Martinez looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Look, I'm just here to document the complaint." "Mr. Richardson, I mean the younger Mr. Richardson, if you clear the snow within the next hour, I can note that corrective action was taken and close the case." "That seems reasonable," Frank said, his eyes still on Deborah. "Though I have to wonder why the HOA is so concerned with minor violations when there are more pressing issues in the neighborhood." Deborah's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, just making an observation." Frank turned to me. "Ethan, go ahead and clear your driveway. Martinez, you mind if I have a word with you about something unrelated?" I wanted to stay and hear what Frank had to say, but I also wanted this ridiculous situation over with. I grabbed my snow shovel from the garage and started clearing the driveway, which honestly only took about 20 minutes since we had one of those single-car driveways common in the neighborhood. The whole time, I could see Frank and Martinez talking by the code enforcement vehicle, with Frank occasionally pointing at houses down the street. Deborah had retreated to her own property, but I could see her watching from her front window, partially hidden behind expensive curtains. When I finished, Martinez came over and took a few photos. "All clear, Mr. Richardson. Case closed. Have a good day." Frank waited until both Martinez and Deborah had gone before walking over to me. "We need to talk. You got time for breakfast after that drama?" "Absolutely." We ended up at Rosie's Diner on Main Street, a local institution that had been serving the Lakewood community since the 1960s. Frank ordered the lumberjack breakfast while I stuck with eggs and toast, my appetite diminished by the morning's events. "So what's the deal with you and Deborah?" I asked once the waitress had poured our coffee. Frank leaned back in the booth, his expression serious. "About 8 months ago, I was contracted to do a series of inspections in Meadowbrook Hills. New construction, some renovations, the usual stuff. 3 of the properties were buildings owned by the HOA itself. The community center, the pool house, and that new storage facility they built near the entrance. I didn't know the HOA owned buildings beyond the community center. Oh yeah, they've been expanding, using HOA dues and special assessments to fund all sorts of projects. Deborah's been president for 6 years now, and she's turned that HOA into a pretty significant little operation." "Okay, so you inspected their buildings. What happened?" Frank took a long sip of coffee. "I failed all 3. Major code violations. The community center had electrical work that wasn't up to standard, done by an unlicensed contractor. Fire hazard. The pool house had structural issues with the renovation, and the storage facility, that was the worst. Foundation problems, improper drainage, electrical issues, the whole 9 yards. I felt my stomach drop. How bad are we talking? Bad enough that I red tagged the storage facility, condemned it until the issues were fixed. The community center and pool house got conditional passes with mandatory corrections within 90 days. Jesus, did they fix the problems? Frank's expression darkened. That's the thing, I don't know. My contract with Lakewood ended and I moved on to other municipalities. I filed my reports with the village, but following up wasn't my responsibility. That falls to the village's permanent building department. So you're saying Deborah might be holding a grudge? I'm saying that calling code enforcement on you for 2 hours of unshoveled snow is petty even by HOA standards. And I'm also saying that Deborah Patterson struck me as someone who doesn't like being told no. Our food arrived, and we ate in contemplative silence for a few minutes. Finally, I asked, "Do you think the buildings are still in violation?" "I think it would be worth finding out. Those reports are public record. You're a homeowner in the HOA, so you have every right to request copies of inspection records for HOA-owned properties. Deborah's going to love that." "Deborah doesn't have to know. You file a Freedom of Information Act request with the village. It's all above board." I thought about it. Part of me just wanted to let it go, to shovel my driveway promptly and avoid Deborah's wrath. But another part of me, the part that had spent 3 years watching Deborah bully neighbors over mailbox heights and fence colors, wanted to know what she was hiding. "How do I file the request?" Frank grinned. "That's my nephew. I'll email you the details when I get home. Request all building inspection reports for HOA-owned properties in Meadowbrook Hills for the past 2 years. That should cover it." Over the next few days, I filed the FOIA request and waited. In the meantime, I made absolutely certain that my property was in perfect compliance with every single HOA bylaw. I measured my grass height, even though it was winter and covered in snow. I checked the exact shade of my front door paint against the approved color list. I even counted the number of decorative items visible from the street to ensure I was under the limit. Deborah drove by my house at least twice a day, slowing down to inspect my property. It would have been creepy if it wasn't so predictable. The response to my FOIA request came back in exactly 7 business days, which was the legal maximum the village had to respond. I picked up the documents from the village hall during my lunch break, and the clerk handed me a thick manila envelope with a receipt to sign. "Popular request," she said conversationally. "You're the 3rd person this week asking for HOA building records. That was interesting. Really, who else requested them? Can't say. Privacy rules. But let's just say there's some interest in the topic." I took the envelope to my car and opened it immediately. Inside were dozens of pages of inspection reports, photographs, and correspondence. Frank's reports were there, dated from last May. I read through them carefully, my anger building with each page. The community center had been cited for electrical work, performed without permits by an unlicensed contractor named Mike Sullivan, who, according to Frank's notes, had a history of code violations in 3 counties. The work was so substandard that Frank had noted it posed a significant fire risk. The pool house renovation had structural modifications made without proper engineering approval. Load-bearing walls had been removed incorrectly, and Frank had expressed concern about potential collapse. The storage facility was a disaster. Improper foundation work, drainage that would cause water damage and potential flooding, electrical panels installed incorrectly, and non-compliant fire exits. Frank's final note on that inspection was damning. This structure should not be occupied or used for any purpose until all cited violations are corrected. Immediate danger to occupants. Then I found the follow-up inspections, or rather, the lack thereof. There was one reinspection scheduled for August, 3 months after Frank's initial reports. The inspector noted that he was denied access to the storage facility and that the HOA requested a postponement. Another reinspection was scheduled for October. Same result. Denied access, postponement requested. The most recent document was from December, just 2 months ago. A letter from Deborah Patterson to the village building department claiming that all repairs had been completed and requesting that the violations be dismissed. Attached was a letter from a structural engineer named David Chen stating that he had reviewed the properties and found them to be in compliance with all applicable codes. Something about that felt off. I drove home and called Frank. "Uncle Frank, I got the reports. Thank you for the suggestion." "What did you find?" I summarized the contents of the envelope. When I mentioned David Chen, Frank was quiet for a moment. "David Chen," he said slowly. "Asian guy, about 50, works out of an office in Naperville." The letterhead says Naperville, yeah. "Ethan, David Chen's license was suspended 6 months ago, falsifying inspection reports for a developer in DuPage County. It was all over the industry newsletters." My heart started pounding. "Are you sure?" "Positive." "I can send you the link to the Illinois Department of Professional Regulation website. You can verify his license status yourself." I pulled up the IDFPR website on my laptop while Frank stayed on the line. Sure enough, David Chen's professional engineer license showed as suspended, effective July 15th of last year. The letter from Chen approving the HOA buildings was dated November 20th, 4 months into his suspension. "Frank, this is fraud." That's exactly what it is. The question is whether Deborah knew his license was suspended. Either way, she submitted false documents to the village. You need to take this to the village building department. Bring everything. Let them handle it from there. Deborah's going to know it was me. Frank's voice was firm. Ethan, listen to me. That storage facility is dangerous. If someone gets hurt or killed because those violations weren't corrected, you'll have to live with knowing you could have prevented it. This isn't about petty HOA drama anymore. This is about safety. He was right. I knew he was right. But I also knew that going up against Deborah Patterson was going to make my life in Meadowbrook Hills very difficult. Okay, I said. I'll go to the village tomorrow. Want me to come with you? I can explain the technical aspects of the violations. Would you? That would actually help a lot. I'll meet you at the village hall at 9 a.m. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the storage facility, which I had actually been inside once. The HOA rented out units to homeowners for a monthly fee, and my neighbor had stored some furniture there temporarily. The building had felt solid enough at the time, but now I wondered what I had missed. Were there cracks in the foundation? Had I noticed any electrical issues? The next morning, Frank and I met in the parking lot of Lakewood Village Hall. It was a modern building, all glass and brick, built about 10 years ago when the village had experienced a population boom. We went to the building department on the second floor and asked to speak with the chief building official. The receptionist made a call, and a few minutes later, a woman in her 50s came out to greet us. Her name tag identified her as Patricia Monroe, Director of Community Development. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" Frank took the lead. "Miss Monroe, I'm Frank Richardson. I did contract inspection work for Lakewood last year. This is my nephew, Ethan Richardson. He's a homeowner in Meadowbrook Hills, and we have some concerns about HOA-owned buildings that I inspected." Patricia's expression shifted from polite interest to serious attention. "Why don't you come back to my office?" Her office was tidy and professional, with framed photos of various Lakewood buildings and development projects on the walls. We sat down, and I laid out all the documents I had received through the FOIA request. I requested these records because I wanted to understand more about the HOA's properties, I explained. What I found concerns me. The inspection reports from May show serious violations. The follow-up documentation shows postponements and denied access. Then in December, the HOA submitted a letter from an engineer clearing the violations. Patricia was already flipping through the pages, her frown deepening. I remember this case. The postponements were frustrating, but the HOA kept citing scheduling conflicts and contractor availability. "Miss Monroe," Frank said gently, "did your department verify David Chen's credentials before accepting his letter? We would have checked his license when he submitted the report. That's standard procedure." She turned to her computer and pulled up what I assumed was the state licensing website. Her face went pale. "His license is suspended." "As of July 15th, Frank confirmed, 4 months before he supposedly inspected those buildings and certified them as safe. Patricia was already reaching for her phone. "Excuse me a moment." She stepped out of the office, and we could hear her speaking urgently to someone down the hall. When she returned, she was accompanied by a man in his 30s wearing a village polo shirt. "This is Tom Breslin, our senior building inspector." "Tom, I need you to get over to Meadowbrook Hills HOA properties immediately. Start with the storage facility on Oak Ridge Drive. Full inspection, and if you see anything that looks like the violations described in Frank's original reports, red tag it immediately." Tom nodded and headed out. Patricia turned back to us. "Gentlemen, thank you for bringing this to our attention. This is a serious matter and we'll be conducting a full investigation. Mr. Richardson, as a homeowner in the community, you should know that we'll be holding an emergency meeting with the HOA board. Will Mrs. Patterson be notified that I brought this to your attention? Patricia considered that. Your FOIA request is a matter of public record, but I don't see any reason to specifically identify you as the source of the investigation. Our own records should have caught this discrepancy. The fact that we accepted a letter from a suspended engineer is our failure as much as anyone's. Frank and I left the village hall feeling a mixture of relief and anxiety. The wheels of bureaucracy were now in motion, and there was no stopping them. Thanks for coming with me, Uncle Frank. You did the right thing, Ethan. Now you go about your business and let the village handle it. That was easier said than done. Over the next week, I watched as village vehicles came and went from the HOA properties. The storage facility was red-tagged within hours of Tom's inspection. Large notices were posted on the doors declaring the building unsafe for occupancy and ordering the removal of all stored items within 72 hours. The neighborhood Facebook group exploded with speculation and outrage. People who had items stored in the facility were furious about the sudden eviction. Deborah posted a lengthy statement claiming that the village was overreaching and that the building was perfectly safe, that this was all a bureaucratic misunderstanding. Then the lawsuit started being discussed. Several homeowners whose belongings were in the storage facility began talking about suing the HOA for the cost and inconvenience of emergency storage relocation. One family had antique furniture that was damaged in the rushed move, pieces that they claimed were worth thousands of dollars. I kept my head down and stayed quiet, but I knew it was only a matter of time before Deborah figured out who had started the investigation. The neighborhood was small, and people talked. The inevitable confrontation came on a Saturday morning 2 weeks after my visit to the village hall. I was washing my car in the driveway, enjoying the unusually warm February weather, when Deborah's BMW pulled up in front of my house. She got out and marched across my lawn, ignoring the stepping stone path I had carefully installed. "You," she said, pointing a finger at me. "You did this." "Did what, Deborah? Don't play stupid. You filed that FOIA request. You went to the village. You set this whole thing in motion." I turned off the hose and faced her directly. "I requested public records that I have every legal right to access as a homeowner and a resident. What I found was concerning, so I brought it to the attention of the appropriate authorities. That's called being a responsible citizen. You've cost this HOA hundreds of thousands of dollars. The storage facility will have to be torn down and rebuilt. We're facing lawsuits. Insurance may not cover it because the violations existed before their policy period. Maybe you should have fixed the violations when my uncle first identified them, instead of avoiding inspections and submitting fraudulent documents." Her face flushed red. "That's defamatory." David Chen is a licensed professional. David Chen's license was suspended 4 months before he allegedly inspected those buildings. The village has confirmed it. Deborah, this isn't going away, and attacking me isn't going to help you. You have no idea what you've done. This neighborhood, these property values, everything I've built on lies and safety violations. Yeah, I'm okay with tearing that down." Another car pulled up. A Toyota Camry with 2 men in suits. They got out and approached us. "Deborah Patterson," the older of the 2 men asked. "Who are you?" He showed a badge. "Detective James Morrison, Lakewood Police Department. This is Detective Kevin Park. We'd like to ask you some questions about the submission of false documents to the village building department and the use of HOA funds for property repairs that were never completed." Deborah's face went from red to white. I want my lawyer. That's your right. You can come with us voluntarily, or we can do this the hard way. Am I under arrest? Not at this time. We're just asking you to come in for questioning. Deborah looked at me, and the hatred in her eyes was palpable. This isn't over, Ethan. Madam, you need to come with us, Detective Morrison said firmly. I watched as they guided Deborah into the back of their vehicle. Neighbors were coming out of their houses now, drawn by the commotion. I saw curtains twitching in windows up and down the street. My phone buzzed. It was Frank. Turn on the local news. I went inside and found the Lakewood local news website. The headline read, HOA President under investigation for fraud and misuse of funds. The article detailed how the village building department had discovered fraudulent inspection reports, and that an investigation had uncovered evidence that HOA funds designated for building repairs had been diverted to other uses. Over the next few days, more details emerged. Deborah had paid David Chen $5,000 to write the letter certifying the buildings, knowing his license was suspended. She had received bids from legitimate contractors to fix the violations, bids that totaled over $300,000. Instead of approving the repairs, she had used the money for cosmetic improvements to the neighborhood entrance and a new irrigation system for the common areas. The HOA board, which had been largely rubber-stamping Deborah's decisions for years, was in chaos. 2 board members resigned immediately, claiming they had no knowledge of the financial mismanagement. A third, the treasurer, was also being investigated for potential complicity. An emergency HOA meeting was called for the following Thursday evening. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Hills received a certified letter announcing the meeting and outlining the basic facts of the investigation. The meeting was held in the gymnasium of the local elementary school because the community center was now also closed pending a full electrical system upgrade. I debated whether to attend. Part of me wanted to avoid the drama, but another part felt like I owed it to the community to be there. Frank encouraged me to go. You started this, he said. See it through. The gymnasium was packed. Nearly every household in the 200-home subdivision was represented. A court-appointed special master was overseeing the meeting, a retired judge named Helen Crawford, who had been brought in by the village to ensure proper procedures were followed. Judge Crawford called the meeting to order and laid out the situation in stark terms. The Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association is in crisis. The president and 1 board member are under criminal investigation. The HOA's buildings are in violation of code and pose safety risks. The association's finances are under scrutiny, and there are significant questions about where member dues and special assessments have been spent. We are here tonight to address immediate concerns and begin the process of recovery. A homeowner raised his hand. Are we liable? Can we be sued? The HOA as an entity can be sued, Judge Crawford explained. Individual homeowners typically have protection through the association structure, but that can vary depending on the situation. I strongly recommend that the association obtain competent legal counsel immediately. Where do we get the money for that? Another homeowner called out. If Deborah stole from us, what's left? A forensic accountant stood up to provide a preliminary report. The news was not good. The HOA had approximately $80,000 in its operating account, but it faced immediate liabilities of over $500,000. The storage facility demolition and rebuild would cost an estimated $400,000. Legal fees, both for the association's defense and potential settlements, could run into the hundreds of thousands more. What about insurance? Someone asked. The insurance company is investigating whether the policy covers losses resulting from intentional acts by the HOA president. That determination could take months. The meeting grew increasingly heated. Some homeowners wanted to sue Deborah personally. Others wanted to sue the village for not catching the violations earlier. A few people suggested just dissolving the HOA entirely. Then someone stood up and pointed at me. "Ethan Richardson, this is your fault. You started this whole mess." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. My stomach clenched, but I stood up. My fault. I reported safety violations and fraud. The mess was already here. Deborah Patterson created it when she chose to ignore code violations and falsify documents. I just brought it to light. "My antique furniture was damaged because they rushed us out of storage," a woman shouted. "Those pieces have been in my family for generations. And they would have been destroyed entirely when that building collapsed," I shot back. "Because that's what my uncle said would happen. The foundation was failing. It was a matter of when, not if." Frank stood up from where he had been sitting near the back. "If I may address the group. I'm Frank Richardson, the inspector who originally cited the violations. I've been doing this work for 30 years. That storage facility was a death trap. The electrical work alone could have caused a fire at any time. The structural issues meant that with enough snow load on the roof or a strong enough wind, the building could have partially collapsed. If that had happened with people inside retrieving their belongings, we would be planning funerals right now, not arguing about inconvenience and furniture." The gymnasium went quiet. The reality of what could have happened seemed to sink in. Judge Crawford spoke up. "Mr. Richardson's point is well taken. The violations were real and dangerous. The question now is how this community moves forward." A homeowner I recognized from a few streets over stood up. His name was Greg Thompson, and he was a lawyer. "Judge Crawford, I'd be willing to serve on an interim board on a volunteer basis until we can hold proper elections. I think we need to stabilize the situation before we can make long-term decisions." Several other people volunteered as well. By the end of the meeting, an interim board had been formed, and the HOA had voted to pursue all legal remedies against Deborah Patterson personally, including liens on her property if necessary. As people filed out, several neighbors approached me. Some thanked me for exposing the corruption. Others glared and muttered under their breath. It was clear that the community was divided. Over the next month, the legal situation became clearer. Deborah was formally charged with fraud, official misconduct, and theft. The amounts involved bumped the theft charge up to a Class 2 felony, carrying a potential sentence of 3 to 7 years in prison. The former treasurer was charged as an accomplice on some counts. David Chen, the engineer with the suspended license, was also charged with fraud and faced the possibility of permanent license revocation and criminal penalties. The HOA's insurance company ultimately agreed to a partial settlement, covering about half of the repair costs, but excluding any coverage for Deborah's personal actions. The association was forced to levy a special assessment on all homeowners of $1,500 to cover immediate costs, with the possibility of additional assessments in the future. That special assessment was painful for many families, including mine. Coming up with $1,500 on short notice wasn't easy, but it was better than living in a community with dangerous buildings and corrupt leadership. The storage facility was demolished in early March. Watching the building come down, I thought about what Frank had said. Someone could have been hurt or killed. Whatever financial pain the community was experiencing now was nothing compared to that alternative. Deborah's criminal case moved slowly through the system. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor was unwilling to budge much. The village was angry about being deceived, and they wanted accountability. In May, nearly 4 months after my fateful snow-shoveling morning, Deborah accepted a plea agreement. She pleaded guilty to theft and fraud charges in exchange for a 4-year prison sentence with the possibility of parole after 2 years. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which meant essentially turning over every asset she and her husband had, including their house in Meadowbrook Hills. The treasurer got a lighter sentence, 18 months, based on his cooperation and evidence that Deborah had been the primary actor in the scheme. David Chen took his case to trial and was convicted. He received a 3-year sentence and a permanent ban from practicing engineering in Illinois. The Meadowbrook Hills HOA held elections in June. The new board was much more transparent than the previous one, publishing detailed financial reports monthly and holding open meetings where homeowners could ask questions. Greg Thompson was elected president, and he ran the association with a light touch, focusing on essential services rather than nitpicking enforcement. One of his first acts was to revise the bylaws to eliminate some of the more ridiculous rules, including the one about snow removal timing. The new rule simply required that driveways and walkways be cleared within a reasonable time, with reasonable defined as 24 hours for regular snowfall and 48 hours for major storms. The community center and pool house were properly repaired over the summer. The costs were significant, but by selling Deborah's seized property and using the insurance settlement, the HOA managed to cover most of the expenses without additional special assessments. The storage facility was rebuilt by November, this time with proper oversight and inspections. Frank was actually hired as a consultant to review the construction plans and do periodic site visits. The new facility was significantly better built than the original, with modern safety features and proper drainage. My relationship with the neighborhood gradually normalized. Some people never forgave me for causing trouble, as they saw it. A few families actually moved away, unable to afford the special assessment or unwilling to live in a community that had been through such turmoil. But most people came to understand that I had done the right thing. Property values actually stabilized and even increased slightly once the legal issues were resolved. Potential buyers liked seeing that the community had dealt with its problems head-on rather than sweeping them under the rug. Frank and I had dinner together one evening in late November, almost exactly a year after Deborah's fraudulent letter to the village. We were back at Rosie's diner, and I ordered the lumberjack breakfast for dinner, in honor of our first meal there. "So," Frank said, cutting into his meatloaf, "any regrets?" I thought about it. The stress, the conflict, the $1,500 special assessment, the uncomfortable encounters with angry neighbors. Honestly, no, you were right from the beginning. This was about more than petty HOA drama. People could have been hurt. You did good, Ethan. I know it wasn't easy. I couldn't have done it without you. If you hadn't been there that morning, if you hadn't done those original inspections properly, none of this would have come to light." Frank shrugged. "I just did my job." That's the thing people don't always understand about building codes and inspections. They're not arbitrary rules to make life difficult. They exist because people got hurt or killed, and we learned from those tragedies. Every code requirement has a reason behind it. Deborah saw them as obstacles to her vision of the perfect neighborhood. Deborah saw a lot of things the wrong way, but she'll have time to think about that now. We finished our meal and stepped out into the crisp November air. The first snow of the season was forecast for that night, and I found myself actually looking forward to it. "Hey, Uncle Frank," I said as we walked to our cars. If I don't shovel my driveway within 12 hours, you're not going to report me, are you? He laughed. Tell you what. You've got 24 hours before I say anything. But after that, all bets are off. I drove home through the streets of Meadowbrook Hills, past houses decorated for Thanksgiving, past the new storage facility with its sturdy construction and proper lighting, past the community center that now had a working electrical system. The neighborhood looked peaceful, almost idyllic in the fading light. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a car parked across the street. For a split second, I tensed, thinking of Deborah's BMW and her surveillance drives. But this was a Honda Accord, and the person inside was just sitting there, talking on the phone. I realized I had been carrying that tension for months, always waiting for the next confrontation, the next crisis. But it was over now. Deborah was in prison. The buildings were safe. The HOA was functioning properly. Life could go back to normal. Inside my house, I made a cup of tea and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. The neighborhood Facebook group had a new post from Greg Thompson, the HOA president. It was the monthly financial report, showing exactly where every dollar of dues money was being spent. Landscaping, snow removal, common area maintenance, insurance, legal reserves. Everything transparent and accounted for. Someone had commented, "Thank you for running the HOA the right way." The comment had 47 likes. Another comment read, "This is what we should have had all along. Accountability matters." I added my own comment, grateful for the new board's transparency and leadership. My phone buzzed with a text from my neighbor Steve, who lived 2 houses down. "Hey man, want to grab a beer this weekend? I owe you an apology for being a jerk about the whole investigation thing. You were right." I texted back, "No apology needed. Beer sounds good. Saturday?" "Saturday it is." That night the snow started falling around midnight. I woke up briefly and looked out my bedroom window at the white flakes accumulating on my driveway. In the morning, I would shovel. Maybe in a few hours, maybe after breakfast. Whenever I got to it would be fine. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living in a real community rather than a dictatorship with mailbox regulations. The price had been high, the process had been painful, but we had come through it together. Stronger, more honest, more united. I thought about Deborah sometimes, wondered if she understood what she had done wrong, or if she still believed she had been protecting the neighborhood. I suspected it was the latter. People like Deborah rarely admitted fault, even when faced with overwhelming evidence. But that wasn't my problem anymore. She was paying her debt to society, and the rest of us were moving forward. The next morning I woke up to 6 inches of fresh snow. I took my time making breakfast, reading the news, finishing my coffee. Then I bundled up, grabbed my shovel, and went outside. The air was cold but not bitter, and the neighborhood was beautiful under its white blanket. I had cleared about half my driveway when Steve came out and started on his own. We waved to each other and he called out, "Need any help?" "I'm good, thanks. Let me know if you change your mind." That was what a neighborhood should be. People helping each other, or at least offering. Not people monitoring each other's snow removal timing with stopwatches. Greg Thompson drove by in his truck and stopped briefly. "Morning, Ethan. How's it going?" "Good. Just doing the shoveling." "I wanted to let you know, the new HOA bylaws were officially filed with the county yesterday. We're also getting new welcome packets printed for any new residents, trying to start fresh." "That's great, Greg. Thank you for everything you've done this year." "Thank you for having the courage to speak up. I know it wasn't easy." He drove off and I finished clearing my driveway. The physical work felt good, cleansing somehow. When I was done, I looked up and down the street at my neighbors doing the same task. Everyone at their own pace, No one judging or timing or preparing to call code enforcement. This was what I had wanted when I moved to Meadowbrook Hills. A nice neighborhood where people could live their lives without harassment, where safety mattered more than appearances, where rules existed to help rather than control. It had taken a crisis to get here, but we had arrived. Later that afternoon, I got an email from the village of Lakewood. It was a survey about resident satisfaction with village services. One question asked, "Have you had any interactions with the village building department in the past year?" I checked yes and added a comment. The building department staff, particularly Patricia Monroe and Tom Breslin, showed professionalism and dedication to public safety when I reported code violations. Their swift action and thorough investigation prevented potential injuries or deaths. Lakewood is fortunate to have such competent public servants. It felt good to give credit where it was due. Frank had been right that following up on the violations wasn't his responsibility, but Patricia and Tom had taken it seriously when it landed on their desks. They could have brushed it off as a minor issue or been annoyed at the extra work. Instead, they had done their jobs properly. The following week, I received a letter from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. It was a victim impact notification, informing me that while I wasn't a direct victim of Deborah's crimes as an HOA member, I had the right to submit a statement about how her actions had impacted the community. The letter included information about her sentencing date and how to submit a statement if I chose to. I thought about it for several days. What would I say? That she had caused financial hardship, that she had divided the community, that she had created a culture of fear. In the end, I decided to keep it simple. I wrote a brief statement explaining that Deborah's actions had put residents at risk and violated the trust that homeowners placed in their elected leaders. I noted that the community had suffered financial harm, but that the greater damage had been to our sense of security and confidence in our institutions. I concluded by saying that I hoped she would use her time in prison to reflect on the difference between leadership and control, between strength and stubbornness. I didn't know if she would ever rate it or if it would make any difference, but it felt important to say. As winter turned to spring, life in Meadowbrook Hills continued to improve. The new board announced that the HOA had reached settlements with most of the homeowners who had threatened lawsuits over the storage facility. The terms were confidential, but Greg told me privately that the amounts were reasonable and that the HOA's insurance had covered most of it. Property values held steady and even increased slightly as word spread that the community had cleaned house and reformed its governance. Several real estate agents specifically mentioned the HOA's transparency in their listings, treating it as a selling point rather than trying to hide the past troubles. Frank continued to do occasional inspection work in Lakewood and surrounding communities. He told me that the story of Meadowbrook Hills had become something of a cautionary tale in building department circles, used as an example of why thorough inspections and follow-up matter. "You've made me a little bit famous," he joked over coffee one Saturday morning. "I get called the guy who took down an HOA. You were just doing your job." "Yeah, but most people don't follow through when things get uncomfortable. You did. That made all the difference." In May, the anniversary of Deborah's guilty plea, the HOA held a community barbecue at the newly renovated pool house. It was the first major social event since the crisis, and there was some nervousness about whether people would attend. They came in droves. Nearly every family in the neighborhood showed up, bringing side dishes and desserts, letting their kids swim in the pool that was now safe and up to code. The atmosphere was festive, almost celebratory. Greg gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the difficult year and their commitment to the community. We've proven that when we work together and demand accountability, we can overcome even serious challenges. Meadowbrook Hills is stronger today than it was a year ago, and that's because of all of you. People applauded, and then someone started a chant. New HOA, new HOA. It was tongue-in-cheek, but also genuine. We really did have a new HOA, one that functioned the way it was supposed to. I spent the afternoon talking with neighbors, some of whom I had barely spoken to before. The crisis had broken down some of the walls between us, made us more aware that we were all in this together. Steve brought his family over to where I was standing by the grill. "Ethan, I want you to meet my wife, Jennifer, and my kids, Tyler and Emma." We shook hands, and Jennifer said, "Steve told me about everything you did last year. Thank you for having the guts to speak up. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt. A lot of people would have looked the other way." "You didn't." Little Emma, who couldn't have been more than 7, tugged on my sleeve. "Are you the snow hero?" I laughed. "The snow hero?" Steve looked embarrassed. I might have told the kids a simplified version of the story. "You know, about how you got in trouble for snow and then discovered the bad guys." "That's actually pretty accurate," I admitted. "Sure, I'm the snow hero." Emma beamed. "That's so cool." As the sun set over the pool house and the party wound down, I found myself reflecting on the entire journey. It had started with such a ridiculous complaint, 2 hours of unshoveled snow, and it had unraveled a web of corruption and danger. If Deborah hadn't been so petty, if she hadn't called code enforcement over something so minor, the violations might never have come to light until something catastrophic happened. In a weird way, her vindictiveness had saved the community. Frank joined me by the pool edge as parents started gathering up tired kids and leftover food. "Good turnout." "Yeah, it feels like things are really getting back to normal, or maybe better than normal." "Better than normal," Frank agreed. "You know what the difference is between a good community and a bad one? It's not about having perfect people or never having problems. It's about how people respond when problems arise." Meadowbrook Hills responded pretty well eventually. Because you gave them the information they needed and the courage to act. Leadership isn't always about being in charge, Ethan. Sometimes it's just about being willing to tell the truth when everyone else is pretending not to see it. We helped clean up from the barbecue, carrying folding tables and bagging trash. It was mundane work, but it felt good to be part of the effort, to be accepted and valued by the community. Driving home that evening, I passed Deborah's old house. A new family had moved in about a month ago after the property sold at auction to satisfy the restitution order. I had met them briefly, a young couple with a baby. They seemed nice, and they had no idea about the history of their home or the drama that had consumed the neighborhood. Maybe that was for the best. They could start fresh, enjoy the community for what it was now rather than being burdened by what it had been. My house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. I had left the porch light on, but the bulb must have burned out. I made a mental note to replace it tomorrow. Not because of an HOA rule about exterior lighting, but just because it was the sensible thing to do. Inside, I poured myself a glass of water and sat on my back deck, looking out at the yard that would need mowing soon. Spring was in full force, and everything was growing, blooming, coming back to life after the harsh winter. I thought about where I would be if that code enforcement officer hadn't shown up on my doorstep that January morning. Probably exactly where I was now, physically, but without having made any real difference in my community. I would have gone through life as a passive observer, letting problems be someone else's responsibility. Instead, I had learned that one person really could make a difference. Not because I was special or heroic, but because I had access to information and I chose to act on it. because I had Frank's expertise and support, because the village officials did their jobs properly, because enough other homeowners cared enough to demand change. It had been a team effort, even though it hadn't felt like it during the lonely moments when neighbors glared at me or blamed me for their financial hardship. My phone buzzed with a text from Greg. "Thanks for being there today. Community is starting to feel like a community again." I texted back, "Thanks for your leadership. We're lucky to have you as president. Want to grab lunch sometime next week? I'd like to talk about potentially joining the board. We have an opening for a compliance officer, and I think you'd be perfect for it." I stared at that message for a long moment. Join the HOA board, after everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately. I had done my part. Let someone else take over. But another part of me recognized the opportunity. I could help ensure that what happened under Deborah's leadership never happened again. I could be part of the solution rather than just the person who had identified the problem. I texted back, "Let's talk about it. Lunch sounds good." The next morning, I woke up to sunshine and birdsong. No snow to shovel. No code enforcement officers in my driveway. No angry HOA presidents confronting me. Just a normal Sunday in Meadowbrook Hills. I made breakfast and read the newspaper, noting a small article in the local section about the continued recovery of Meadowbrook Hills HOA. The article quoted Greg and mentioned that the community had become a model for HOA reform in the region. Several other subdivisions were adopting similar transparency measures and oversight procedures. Something good had come from the chaos. Multiple communities were benefiting from the lessons learned in Meadowbrook Hills. I spent the afternoon working in my yard, trimming bushes and planting some flowers along the front walkway. Steve came over with a 6-pack of beer, and we sat on my front porch talking about nothing in particular. Sports, work, plans for the summer, normal neighbor conversation. "You thinking about joining the board?" he asked eventually. "How did you know about that?" Greg mentioned it to a few of us. He wanted to gauge whether people would support it. And everyone he talked to thought it was a great idea. "You've proven you'll stand up for what's right. That's exactly what the board needs." I'm worried people will see it as me trying to grab power or control things. Steve shook his head. "Nobody thinks that." Well, maybe a few holdouts who still think Deborah was unfairly persecuted, but they're in the minority. Most people recognize that you acted out of legitimate concern for safety. I'll think about it. But I already knew what my answer would be. I would join the board. Not because I wanted power, but because I had learned that participating in governance was the only way to ensure it worked properly. Complaining from the sidelines was easy. Actually doing the work to make things better was harder, but it was the only thing that actually made a difference. The following Tuesday, I met Greg for lunch at a sandwich shop in downtown Lakewood. We ordered and found a quiet booth in the back. "So," Greg said, "I'm guessing Steve told you about my idea." "He did. And I'm interested, but I want to understand what the role would entail." Greg pulled out a folder with documents. "The compliance officer position is responsible for reviewing homeowner requests for modifications, ensuring common areas are properly maintained, and serving as a liaison with vendors and contractors. Basically, making sure the day-to-day operations run smoothly and in compliance with our bylaws and state regulations." That sounds like a lot of work. It is, but it's also crucial. After what happened with Deborah, we need someone in that role who understands the importance of following proper procedures and who isn't afraid to speak up if something doesn't look right. I reviewed the documents. The time commitment was significant, probably 10 to 15 hours a month, but it was manageable with my work schedule. "What about the people who still blame me for the special assessment?" I asked. There will always be some people who are unhappy. But Ethan, you can't let a vocal minority dictate whether you do something positive for the community. The vast majority of homeowners support you. We conducted an informal survey last month, and your approval rating in the neighborhood is actually higher than mine. That surprised me. Really? Really? People respect honesty and courage. You showed both. So what do you say? Will you join us? I thought about Uncle Frank's words about leadership and truth-telling. I thought about the community barbecue and the new families moving into Meadowbrook Hills who would benefit from strong, honest governance. Yes, I said, I'll do it. Greg's face broke into a wide grin. Excellent. The board will officially vote to appoint you at next month's meeting, but that's just a formality. Welcome to the team. We shook hands, and I felt a sense of purpose that had been missing before. This wasn't just about where I lived, it was about being an active part of making that place better. The next few months flew by. I was formally appointed to the HOA board in June and immediately dove into the work. I reviewed maintenance contracts, inspected common areas, and worked with homeowners who wanted to make modifications to their properties. It was detail-oriented work, but I found it satisfying. One of my first initiatives was to create a comprehensive inspection schedule for all HOA-owned properties. Every building would be inspected annually by a licensed professional, with reports published to all homeowners. No more sweeping problems under the rug. I also worked with Greg to establish an HOA ombudsman program, where homeowners could confidentially report concerns about governance or financial management without fear of retaliation. The program was managed by a neutral third party, a local attorney who volunteered his time. Frank helped me develop the inspection protocols, making sure they were thorough but not burdensome. You want to catch problems early, before they become expensive or dangerous, he explained. That's the whole point of preventive maintenance. In August, I received a letter from Deborah. It was forwarded through the HOA's attorney, and the envelope had a prison stamp. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was surprisingly brief, and in its own way sad. Deborah wrote that she had spent her time in prison reflecting on her actions. She claimed she had only wanted what was best for the community, that she had made bad decisions under pressure, that she never meant for anyone to get hurt. She didn't quite apologize, but she acknowledged that she had made mistakes in judgment. She ended by saying that she hoped the community was doing well, and that the new leadership was serving the residents properly. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Whether Deborah truly understood the magnitude of what she had done, or was simply trying to make herself feel better, I couldn't know. But it didn't matter anymore. She was where she belonged, and Meadowbrook Hills was moving forward without her. I did show the letter to Greg, who sighed and filed it away. She still doesn't really get it, he said. She thinks she made mistakes in judgment, not moral and legal failures, but at least she's not causing problems anymore. By fall, the community had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new storage facility was operating smoothly, with a waiting list of homeowners who wanted to rent units. The revenue helped offset the costs of other improvements, making it less likely that special assessments would be needed in the future. I had grown into my role on the board, and I was genuinely enjoying it. I liked helping neighbors navigate the process of getting approval for a deck or a fence. I liked ensuring that the snow removal contractor was doing their job properly. I liked being part of something bigger than myself. One evening in late October, Frank and I were having our regular dinner at Rosie's Diner when he asked me how I felt about everything that had happened. Honestly, I said, I'm grateful. I know that sounds weird, given all the stress and conflict, but I learned a lot about myself and about how communities work. I learned that I can handle more than I thought I could. You proved you have integrity, Frank said. That's not a small thing. I had a good example, I replied, nodding at him. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, then Frank said, I'm retiring. For real this time. No more contract inspection work. Are you okay? Is everything all right? I'm fine. I'm just ready to actually retire. Fish, travel, spend time with your aunt. I've been doing this work for 35 years and I think I've earned some rest. You've earned a lot more than rest. You've earned the thanks of every community you've kept safe. Frank waved off the compliment, but I could see he was pleased. Just doing my job. But I wanted you to know, in case you need inspection help for the HOA, I can recommend some good people. I'd appreciate that. And Frank, thank you for everything. You don't need to thank me, your family. The first snow of the season came in mid-November, a light dusting that barely covered the ground. I watched it fall from my kitchen window, coffee in hand, and thought about how much had changed since that morning almost exactly a year ago when Deborah had called code enforcement over 2 hours of unshoveled snow. I went outside and swept the light snow off my driveway with a broom. The whole job took about 5 minutes. No code enforcement officers came. No angry HOA presidents confronted me. Just a quiet morning in a peaceful neighborhood. That afternoon, the board held its monthly meeting. We reviewed the financial statements, approved several homeowner modification requests, and discussed plans for holiday decorations in the common areas. It was routine and boring and exactly what HOA governance should be. After the meeting, Greg pulled me aside. I wanted to give you a heads up. Channel 7 is doing a story on HOA reform and they want to interview us. I think it would be good for you to participate, tell your side of the story. I don't know if I want that kind of attention. I understand, but I think it could help other communities. If people hear how one homeowner's willingness to speak up led to real change, it might encourage others to do the same. I thought about it. The story was already public record. The news coverage from the previous year had included my name. Doing an interview wouldn't change my privacy situation, but it might help others. Okay, I agreed. I'll do it. The interview took place the following week at my house. The reporter, a woman named Lisa Chen, was professional and well prepared. She asked thoughtful questions about what had motivated me to investigate the HOA finances, how I had felt during the confrontation with Deborah, and what advice I would give to other homeowners facing similar situations. Don't be afraid to ask questions, I told her. HOAs handle significant amounts of money and make decisions that affect your property and your quality of life. You have a right to know how they are operating, and if something doesn't seem right, trust your instincts. Request documents, talk to neighbors. Contact the appropriate authorities if necessary. But you faced significant backlash from the community, Lisa pointed out. How did you handle that? It was hard, I admitted. There were times when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. But then, I would remember my uncle's words about the buildings being dangerous, and I knew that whatever social discomfort I was experiencing was nothing compared to the potential harm that could have occurred if those violations hadn't been addressed. The story aired 2 weeks later on a Sunday evening. I watched it with Frank and my aunt, and I was surprised by how fair and balanced it was. Lisa included interviews with Greg, with Patricia Monroe from the Village Building Department, and with several other Meadowbrook Hills homeowners. She even included a brief statement from Deborah's attorney, though Deborah herself had declined to be interviewed. The story ended with Lisa noting that HOA reform was gaining momentum in Illinois and other states, with new laws requiring greater transparency and oversight. Meadowbrook Hills was mentioned as an example of how communities could recover from governance failures and emerge stronger. My phone started buzzing almost immediately with texts and calls from neighbors and friends who had seen the story. Most were supportive and congratulatory. A few local news outlets called asking for follow-up interviews, which I politely declined. I had said what I needed to say. The holidays came and went, and another January arrived. I was standing in my driveway early one morning, coffee in hand, when it started to snow. Light flakes at first, then heavier, accumulating quickly on the ground. I smiled, remembering the day that had started everything. This time there was no panic about timing, no worry about HOA violations. I would shovel when the snow stopped, whenever that was. Or maybe I would wait until after breakfast. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Meadowbrook Hills was a better place now, safer, more transparent, more democratic. The buildings were sound. The finances were open to scrutiny. The leadership actually served the community rather than dictating to it. I had played a role in that transformation, but so had many others. Frank, who had done his job with integrity. Patricia and Tom, who had taken my concerns seriously. Greg and the other board members who had worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. The homeowners who had demanded accountability and supported reform. It really did take a village, or at least a subdivision. As the snow continued to fall, I went inside and made breakfast. Later, I would shovel. Later, I would go about my day. But for now, I just enjoyed the peace and quiet of a winter morning in a community that had learned to be better. The snow that had once been a source of conflict was now just snow. Beautiful, natural, and nothing to worry about. And that, more than anything else, told me that we had truly moved past the crisis and into something healthier and more sustainable. Meadowbrook Hills would never be perfect. No community is. There would be disagreements and challenges ahead. But we had proven that we could face those challenges together, with honesty and integrity, and come out stronger on the other side. That was enough. That was everything.